Oh, it's dark. I gotta do a news. Let's see, I gotta do a news update for you. The world news, and I'm watching ABC, ABC News. For the first time, as far as I could tell, it's raining. They had to deal with they talked about the Carter page, the FBI, and all of these things. And it's interesting because you're now going to begin to see a narrative. They didn't want to deal with any of this about the FBI and Carter page, but it's got a lot of play on online outlets and media outlets. Now I'll show you first. I'll show you something interesting on how they covered President Trump's trip to Davos, Switzerland. Throughout the day, there were reporters, and they said it, on their reporting that he was greeted in a. They were surprised that Mr. Trump was greeted the way he was. Many foreign leaders were very receptive and acceptive. Now, when Mr. Obama also made these particular ones to Davos, what they played was the actual receptions that he had, how he was greeted, and sometimes it was not so well, but they focused on anybody that met Mr. Obama and were happy about him. The news reported nothing about, they simply asked Mr. Trump, how do you think you will be received? And he said, well, look, because he was received well. All the media reporters were surprised. They didn't play any of that on the world news. They said, Mr. Trump, like in his arrogance, believes he will be treated well, but no report on the actual way he was received. That's how manipulation is. Now it's interesting because what the media is now doing is going to begin giving a narrative that any questions about the investigation of Mueller and all are really fake to ask questions. And these were the texts. They were forced to show the texts of some of them, of Strzok and Page. They showed a few. Then they also showed some of the text where they were negative against Bernie Sanders. But the text they did not show, the ones that are real concerning, and then if you followed the story, how this man was in an influential position both in the interviews of Mrs. Clinton when she was exonerated, as well as some of the interviews of Trump's people. And some of the texts that they are not going to show you were the ones where they spoke about using their authority in case Mr. Trump ever gets elected. These are the ones that show you the real story. If he gets elected, what would we have to do? And I know they sincerely believe this, but they've obviously overstepped their bounds and it's coming into the light. And in essence, they said we would have to maybe put Andy's plan in place, which is probably Andy McCarthy, meaning we can proceed with any type of an investigation in order to get an impeachment or whatever they felt they could do. Those are the ones that are concerning, which they will not play you. But what they had to show on the world news was a few of them without letting you see the whole story, which the concerning story to anybody in any of this would be, were they behind the scenes manipulating? Were they making decisions because of their bias? Okay, that's what seemed like was the real problem. Okay, now the media had to get into it in order to run with it. The breaking news for tonight, I'm posting this right away, is Trump also offered not only what we refer to as a path to citizenship, critics say amnesty, but he offered it for almost 2 million illegal immigrants. And the DACA program only covered, they're saying, about 700,000. I've heard different numbers. Now, he offered that, and the way the media said, this is what they said. This is a good offer for those who are pro-immigrant. The media, as they reported it, they said he offered it for 1.8 million or just under 2 million immigrants. Then they said, and this is what he demands. This is what Trump demands in order to be gracious to the immigrants. You never saw a report on Mr. Obama, whether it was Obamacare, no matter what it was. You never saw a narrative that said, they're working on something good for the country, whatever it was, but this is what Mr. Obama is demanding in order to do something good. So this is what we say narrative. So people that don't follow it closely, they immediately think, wow, he's demanding this. So this is how it's played. And they had to engage in the FBI thing because it's got enough play. Normally, they would not engage in any of these stories. Back in the old days where you did not have independent bloggers and so forth, they never engaged in any of that. They covered a lot of that up. And just the coverage, the world news coverage, at least on ABC, was not, how was he received in Davos? And world leaders praised him at Davos. It was, how do you think you will be received? And his answer was, because they did not show you the coverage of his reception, which they did in many other cases. The famous case of, there's so many you can do on this. So what they'll begin to do is play a game. The 1.8 million path to citizenship, which covers a lot more, those that are pro-immigrant like I am are looking for, let's get this law passed. And even in the conversation on the news, look how deceptive they are. They went back to the meeting that Mr. Trump had openly before the press, which he surprised everybody because he let the press remain in the room. That was about maybe 10 days ago now. And that meeting he discussed openly. And then they referred to DACA. And then they actually said in the meeting, but what are you going to do for the DACA? Look, the DACA is this. The DACA is, let's get a law. And they said, but can you guarantee the DACA? For people that are familiar with everything, you should be able to see that they're not really concerned. The media and some of the leading Democrats are not really concerned with getting something. They're concerned with what they believe is what they would really want to do. And they can't get off of it, okay? Whether it's the removal of Mr. Trump or whatever. Now, they do this night after night, and it won't stop. I was surprised they covered in depth, meaning they began to say, this is the situation that's going on with the DOJ, the FBI, and these things. But then they played selective texts. The most concerning text that the public would want to see would be ones where these people behind the scenes said, in essence, if this man gets elected, we'll have to use our authority through the investigative process in order to remove the man. That would be as you looked at most of them throughout this last 6 months or so. And so they had to engage because it's got the public involved. And that's how you know, because they had to put them up there. But what they showed you immediately was like a defense for the other side. They didn't show you true news reporting. Whether the secret society was in jest or not, which was one of the texts, the concerning thing was the role that these particular FBI agents had and their influence. That's what people look at. And you should be, people that are pro-immigrant, they should be happy with this proposal. And the proposal was put out by Trump's people while he was in Davos. And the proposal rightfully is going to anger many conservatives, okay? And so then they also played a clip from a couple of conservatives, And then they played one from a Democrat, or said what the Democrat said, and said this is a joke. This proposal is a joke. Now, for those in the middle that want to really do something, even this coverage, the way they're doing it, is not helpful. It's not helpful because they want to drive a wedge. They want to drive a wedge. The text, the way they presented the text from these FBI people, who were Strokes and Page, was to present to the public, wow, but they were also mad at like Bernie Sanders. They also spoke negatively about Bernie Sanders. The concerning thing are the texts that they didn't show, where the text said, if this man Trump ever gets elected, then in essence we'll have to possibly put in plan what most believe is we'll have to use our authority to get on. Mr. Strux initially showed no desire to really get into the investigation about Russian collusion. But something then happened. Not that he felt there was Russian collusion, but something happened where he felt like possibly we can sway the way this whole investigation goes, which would possibly lead to possibly indicting the president. And it was those other things. Now, so you're going to begin to see in the media kind of like a narrative saying any concerns about that were like a fabrication. But they do this, it's not a surprise, that they do this constantly. Many years ago, there was a reporter from CNN, the one I mentioned earlier, Nick Robertson. And at that time, you had, which I supported, which was called the Arab Spring. Now, this reporter, Nick Robertson, he went, and the clips I heard today, okay, on talk radio and stuff, but I remember it. And he was a reporter that was going to report on the uprising in Egypt, Arab Spring. And what they tried to do is find somebody. As they were over there, it was right after Mr. Obama got elected, and they were interviewing various people and saying, it's so wonderful. And isn't this sort of like Mr. Obama, President Obama's? It's because he's now in office, and the whole world movement behind Mr. Obama, is he to have the credit for what's happening now in Egypt? And they asked 3 Egyptians that were young people that wanted freedom, and their answers were, in essence, what are you asking us about Mr. Obama? This is something that rose from us. It's something that came from us. So they were searching for some world story where they could present their narrative. And eventually, Mr. Robertson, Nick Robertson said, at the end, he didn't get the response he wanted. He said, but as you heard, and then he said, they credit like Obama for it. Why didn't you do one report today? Why didn't you actually report on the reception he had? They actually, when they asked Mr. Trump, they said, look at that. He is so proud and arrogant that he says he's going to be received well. He was received well. What kind of reporting is that? If you had tremendous protests there in the streets, things that you were possibly hoping to have, you would have reported that. All right, I know it's in the dark, but I figured I'd give you that one. For those who are pro-immigrant, you're going to have conservatives and you're going to have Democrats against this proposal. And this proposal went a lot further. And they showed a couple of past clips from Mr. Trump when he was interviewed, and he said, I want to do something for the dreamers. I want to do something for them, meaning this. And they showed that clip, and then they showed the Feinstein clip and said, but what are you going to do for DACA? It's almost like they played it in a way where they said, even if you get the 1.8 million, even if you managed to get this through, but what are you going to do for the DACA? I know most of you are educated and you would realize what stupidity that is, the way they rolled that out. Some that might not follow it as much might actually be thinking at the end of this proposal, even if you get granted the citizenship, some might be thinking, but he never did anything for DACA. And I wouldn't have to explain why that is so ignorant. But that's how they played those news clips. And what did he say back then? And then Miss Feinstein asked him, what about the Dreamers? This is the Dreamers. This is about the DACA. This is about making, oh, but even if you make it legal, Mr. Trump, you didn't extend DACA. All right. That's your news. That's what you see. That's what these local Kohler Times, I didn't even read it yet. If I read it, they'll have something of that nature.